So my name is Freeman Dyson. I'm an old physicist who has been sitting around here for about 60 years. And since my memories go back a long time, I also like to look a long time into the future, and that's what we're going to be talking about.
If you had to sort of jump forward 50 years, is there sort of one question you would like to see answered?
Oh, what about that? Well, of course, I'd like to see the aliens, there's no doubt. And it will be tremendous to meet some aliens and see how the universe looks from their point of view. That would be a great moment. Whether we discover extraterrestrial life or not, of course, that's totally unpredictable. And if we discover it, it'll probably be by luck and just by happening to bump into something in the sky that we don't understand and turns out to be an alien. So, I mean, I hope very much that will happen, but I wouldn't bet on it.
Do you think it's more likely we'll find some evidence of life within the solar system outside of the Earth, or on an extrasolar planet?
Well, I don't think it'll be on a planet at all. That's, of course, another thing I would like to say out loud. I mean, all this emphasis on planets, I think, is misguided. What life mostly needs is real estate, that is, area in which to spread out and live. And if you look at the real estate in the universe, most of it is on smaller objects, not on planets. And so there are millions and billions and trillions of small objects like comets and asteroids and dust grains and rocks and all kinds of things floating around. And that's where most of the area actually is, whereas the amount of area on planets is quite small. So I would say, if I were betting on where life is likely to be found, I would say probably not on planets.
In the case of, finding alien intelligence, I mean, there is always the possibility that we'll just find microbes.
Oh, very much so. I mean, it's very likely that life everywhere began with microbes, and it could very well have ended with microbes. I mean, to make a multicellular creature, it certainly took a long time on the Earth. Go from one cell to an animal is a big jump, and then from an animal to a human being is another big jump. And so I would say, if we encounter life, it most likely will be just microbes. But on the other hand, if it happens to be aliens who already learned how to broadcast radio signals, then they may be much easier to detect.
That would be something.
Yeah, of course, this listening for radio signals is something that's been going on for 50 years, and we've not found one. And so some people are discouraged about that. But I would say, because data processing is getting better and better all the time, we still have a very good chance of finding radio signals.
And I guess there's always, because this is impossible to predict, there's always the chance it could happen tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Right? So when you, I guess, look to the future 50 years from now, what do you see as our place in the solar system? Are we still going to be mostly earthbound with a few robotic probes here and there?
Well, I wouldn't say a few robotic probes here and there. I would say robotic probes everywhere. I mean, robots are getting cheaper and cheaper and more capable. So that's just going to go ahead. There will probably be big, by that in 50 years, probably quite big industries in space with machines in charge. And then the question is, of course, will people actually be doing anything out there, which is unpredictable because we just don't know. I would guess that in 50 years you won't see anything very exciting. In 100 years, maybe. I mean, the really exciting thing is when you have new societies in space where people go to live there permanently and live differently from the way we're living on Earth. And that's going to take a longer time. I would say 100 years more likely than 50.
What would drive us to do that?
It's all a question of who wants to go and why. And I mean, I'm not driving anybody. I'm just saying somebody might like to go, and there's lots of things to do there. Who wants to go and take the risks and spend the money, of course, remains to be seen.
I was wondering if you had sort of a vision going forward the next 50 years for our energy future. Is there, what will it look like 50 years down the line?
Well, certainly shale gas will be very large. It's much better distributed over the world than oil. And but there's also a lot of shale oil as well, deep down, so that may be better distributed than the present day oil fields. In any case, I mean, that's going to be undoubtedly in 50 years the main source of energy. It's very likely, but in the meantime, we may have cheap solar power, and I hope so, but that's not a sure thing. If we have cheap solar power, of course, that also is very well distributed. So it means every country essentially has it. It's particularly good for the tropical countries. So with solar and shale gas, you're doing pretty well. And I think, of course, there are other contenders. There's always nuclear energy, which is not doing so well. Just 50 years ago, I believed that nuclear energy was the wave of the future, and that turned out to be wrong. And so you never know. Might be a big comeback for nuclear, but I doubt it.
Are you hoping that we will reduce our carbon emissions significantly from where they are now?
No, I don't think decarbonizing is that important. I mean, I like carbon dioxide. It's very good for plants. We know the sort of the non-climate effects of carbon dioxide are good, and they're very strong. It's good for the vegetation. It's good for the natural vegetation as well as for the farms. So it's essentially carbon dioxide is vital for food production. It's vital for wildlife. So for all sorts of reasons, which have nothing to do with climate, it's good. But on the other hand, carbon dioxide also has effects on climate, which may not be so good, but that's much less sure. The effects of carbon dioxide on climate are really very poorly understood. And of course, there I'm in a minority. The experts all seem to think they understand it. I don't think they do.
Do you think that we'll, I guess, get a better understanding soon?
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, climate is a very complicated story. And we may or may not understand it better. I think the main thing that's lacking at the moment is humility. So the climate experts have set themselves up as being the sort of guardians of the truth, and they think they have the truth, and that's a dangerous situation.
In terms of, I guess, policy, is there an argument to be made for just sort of hedging our bets and trying to reduce our carbon dioxide emissions as much as possible, just in case the models turned out to be accurate?
No, I don't think that's sensible. I mean, because it means you're doing huge damage to the environment, which, for non-climatic effects, at the cost of large amounts of money, and very likely getting no benefit at all. So I don't think it's a good bargain, no matter which way you look at it.
What would the huge effects to the environment be?
Well, simply producing less vegetation, making the plants have to struggle for water more. I mean, carbon dioxide is a substitute for water. So if you have less carbon dioxide, the plants need more water in order to survive. So it produces deserts, and that has nothing to do with climate. It's just a biological effect.
Are there any, I guess, technological developments that you found particularly surprising over the course of your career?
Well, of course, the big excitement has been the genome, from a scientific point of view. That's the most amazing thing. I would say the big revolution in science that I see coming is understanding the brain. And that, of course, can have huge consequences, both for technology and also for medicine, and just for understanding ourselves. To record completely what's going on in a brain, you'd have to have something like 1 billion little transmitters in the brain, which you could imagine being some tiny little objects, sort of the size of a dust grain, which you somehow float through the blood vessels into the brain. And then each of them is then a little radio transmitter, and it could collect information from about 1 million neurons. A neuron has a bandwidth of about 1 kilohertz, that's 1,000 bits per second. And a microwave transmitter, has a bandwidth of about a gigahertz, which is 1 billion bits per second. So roughly speaking, one little microwave transmitter could transmit the information from 1 million neurons. So to do the entire brain, which is something like 1 trillion neurons, you only need of the order of 1 billion transmitters. And so the whole thing could perhaps work. I mean, it's a question whether you'd want to do that with a human being, but at least you could do it with a monkey. So you could maybe then study in detail the processes going on in a brain in real time. So that's the kind of technology that's going to be available. If you can do that, then I would think it's very likely you can really understand in some depth really how the brain is dealing with the senses and feelings and all the rest. We know that the brain it's not just a computer. It does have emotions and feelings and all kinds of things we don't understand driving its behavior. And I think there's a good chance we could understand all that.
Although it seems like there's a big gap between collecting all of that data and then somehow backing out from those patterns, all of these things like emotions or thoughts.
In fact, that is the problem, yes, precisely. At the moment, we're drowning in information but lacking understanding. And that's, of course, will be even more so when we have this brain monitoring system. So you'll have huge amounts of information. The question is, can you understand what it's saying? And that's a big and scary possibility that we would be in control of our own minds. And it's a very dangerous thing, of course. It could be very good or it could be very bad.
So this might be a tough question to answer, but are there any technologies that are going to have a big impact 50 years from now? Things that are really going to change our way of life?
Yeah, well, of course, I will not. The really good ones are the ones that come by surprise. So they're obviously the ones I won't mention. So, but the things I think of are mostly biotech. That I can imagine that in 50 years, biotech will have reached the point where we can grow things rather than making them, so that a very large amount of our industry sort of will be converted to biotech instead of manufacturing things in the old-fashioned way, which has to be done in big quantities. You grow them so that all you need is just to write out the genetic instructions, and the super chicken or whatever it is produces all the stuff that you want. So chairs and tables and windows and cups and saucers and cars and airplanes, whatever it is, maybe it could all be grown. And that will, of course, be a new art form. It will be a profound change in the way we do things.
So this would be growing inert, inorganic objects using a biological system?
It would be, just as we use wood for making tables today. Wood is a biological material, but you could do a lot more. You could have the table grow itself instead of having to be made. If I'm right, it'll happen in about 50 years. And of course, it will be very helpful to the poor countries, which can all do biology. In poor countries are not well supplied with minerals or not well supplied with fuel under present conditions. But everybody has sunlight and everybody has plants. And so that's what you need for doing biology. So I think it will be, in the end, a way of evening out the wealth. Of course, I don't know anything about the details,
Yeah.
but what I would hope, it would be sort of a back to the village situation where, especially in the poorer tropical countries, you have this huge migration of people out of the villages into the cities. The cities are horribly overcrowded and polluted, and the villages are deserted. That's a sort of pattern in many parts of the world. And I think that the reason people go into the cities, of course, is because the jobs are in the cities. There are no jobs in the villages. I think this kind of biotech might enable people to move back to the villages, so the villages would become gentrified and would be nice places to live, and you could also have jobs in the villages. I mean, this is roughly what's happened already in Western Europe and my home country of England. So the villages are still beautiful the way they always have been, but the people who live in the villages are not farmers anymore. The people who live in the villages now are stockbrokers and bankers, and they live in the villages because that's a nice way to live. And I hope it'll be the same in a country like China if you want to just wait 50 years.
And then I just had a sort of meta question, which was just we've been talking a lot about sort of the far future, um, and I know you've written before that it's better to be wrong than to be vague. But you know, does it is it at all strange to predict to sort of offer up these predictions so far into the future?
Well, I think it's fine. I mean, the point about the prediction is not that it's true. Prediction is just either a warning or a hope. I mean, either one or the other. But it doesn't have much to do with truth. So predictions should never claim to be true. But you can claim that there are possibilities, that there's something you ought to think about.